The soft rustle of satin against the wooden floor echoed in the silent church as I stepped through the towering oak doors. The faint scent of lilies, Evelyn's choice, not mine, mingled with the aged aroma of candle wax and polished pews. My heart pounded in my chest, its rhythm too quick for the slow, measured pace my father had set beside me. I could feel his reassuring squeeze on my arm, but even that comfort couldn't erase the growing knot in my stomach. There he was, Alexander. My Alexander, standing at the altar in his tailored black suit, a sight that had once filled me with joy. But today, there was something different. The confident, carefree man I had fallen in love with seemed distant, his posture stiff, his eyes locked on me but lacking their usual warmth. His face was set in a neutral mask, betraying none of the excitement I had expected to see. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling and focus on the familiar faces lining the pews. My mother dabbed at her eyes with the tissue, and my best friend, Claire, gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up from the front row. But my gaze inevitably landed on Evelyn, seated like a queen on her throne in the first row. She wore an elegant navy blue dress that perfectly complemented her poised demeanor. Her sharp eyes assessed me as I approached, and for a fleeting moment, I caught the slightest hint of disapproval in her gaze, just enough to send a chill down my spine. "This is your day, Nora. Focus on Alexander. This is about the two of you," I reminded myself, but the nagging doubts persisted. When I finally reached the altar, Alexander took my hand. His grip was firm, almost too firm, as if he were trying to anchor himself to something solid. I searched his eyes, desperate to find reassurance. "You look beautiful," he whispered, but the words felt rehearsed, hollow. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you," I whispered back, my voice tight with nerves. "You look perfect." The ceremony began, and the pastor's voice droned on, but I barely heard the words. My mind was too busy replaying the last few months, trying to pinpoint where things had started to shift between us. Was it the day we argued about the guest list? Or when Evelyn insisted on taking over the rehearsal dinner? I had brushed off those moments as pre-wedding stress, convinced that once the big day arrived, everything would fall into place. But now, standing here in front of our closest friends and family, I wasn't so sure. The moment of truth came when the pastor asked us to exchange our vows. I had written mine weeks ago, pouring my heart into every word. But as I spoke them, the vulnerability of the words hung heavy in the air, like an offering waiting to be accepted or rejected. "I promise to love you, to stand by you, and to build a life filled with joy and adventure," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I promise to be your partner, your best friend, and your confidant, no matter what challenges we face." I saw the slightest twitch in Alexander's jaw as I finished. Was it nerves? Or was it something more? When it was his turn, he hesitated for the briefest of moments before speaking. "Nora, you're the most important person in my life," he began, but his tone was off, lacking the sincerity I had hoped for. "I promise to support you, to be there for you, and to cherish the life we're going to build together." His words hung in the air, and I felt a pang of disappointment. They were the right words, but they didn't carry the weight I needed to hear. Evelyn's gaze felt like a laser on the side of my face. I didn't need to look at her to know she was watching my every move, analyzing every emotion that crossed my features. The pastor moved on, guiding us through the final steps of the ceremony. I barely registered the applause that erupted when we were pronounced husband and wife. Alexander leaned in to kiss me, and though his lips were warm, the kiss felt more like a formality than a promise. At the reception, I struggled to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. I watched as Alexander mingled with guests, his smile returning when he spoke to his friends, but each time he glanced at me, that distance was back. I found myself constantly checking Evelyn's position in the room, noting how she moved effortlessly from one group to the next, her influence ever present. It was as if she was the real host of this wedding, and I was merely a participant. By the time the cake was cut, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled Alexander aside, away from the chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses. "Alexander, Can we talk for a minute? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He glanced around nervously, then nodded. Of course. What's wrong? I led him out to the garden, where the cool evening air provided a brief respite from the stuffy reception hall. The distant sounds of laughter and music faded into the background as I turned to face him. Is everything all right? I asked, searching his eyes for any sign of the man I used to know. You've been distant today. I just need to know if... Nora, it's nothing, he interrupted, running a hand through his hair. It's just... a lot, you know? Weddings, all these people, the expectations. But it's more than that, isn't it? I pressed. You've been different for a while now, and I don't know if it's just the stress or if there's something else going on. He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. I don't know what you want me to say, Nora. I'm here, aren't I? We're married now. This is supposed to be a happy day. His words stung, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Detached. Like he was fulfilling a duty rather than living a dream. I just want us to be honest with each other, I said quietly. If something's bothering you, we need to talk about it. Before he could respond, the sound of footsteps approached. I turned to see Evelyn, her expression calm but with that ever-present air of authority. There you two are, she said smoothly. People are starting to wonder where the bride and groom disappeared to. Alexander, dear, could you come with me for a moment? I need your help with something. Alexander shot me an apologetic glance. We'll talk later, okay? I nodded, feeling a familiar sense of resignation wash over me as I watched him walk away with his mother. This was becoming a pattern, Evelyn pulling him away just when I needed him most. As I stood alone in the garden, the wind picking up and rustling the leaves around me, I couldn't help but wonder, had I just married a man who would never truly be mine? The wedding veil had lifted, and I feared that the future it revealed wasn't the one I had imagined. The honeymoon glow faded faster than I could have ever anticipated. It wasn't that the trip itself had been unpleasant. Alexander and I had spent 2 blissful weeks in the Maldives, soaking up the sun and escaping from reality. But as soon as we returned home, the problems that had simmered beneath the surface during our wedding day started bubbling over. It began innocently enough. A phone call here, a quick visit there. Evelyn had always been a constant presence in Alexander's life, and I had accepted that, even admired the closeness of their relationship. But after the wedding, her visits became more frequent, her critiques more pointed. Are you sure this is the right color for the walls, dear? Evelyn asked one afternoon, running her perfectly manicured fingers along the freshly painted surface of our living room. I had spent days agonizing over the shade, a soft, warm beige that I thought would make the room feel cozy. I like it, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. I think it brings out the warmth in the space. Evelyn tilted her head, her lips pursed. It's just that it might be a bit too bland. You don't want your home to feel boring, do you? A little color wouldn't hurt. I clenched my teeth behind a forced smile. Thanks for the suggestion, Evelyn. I'll think about it. Her suggestions became a regular part of our interactions. She commented on everything from my cooking to the arrangement of our furniture, always with that same sweet, condescending tone. But the worst part wasn't even the criticism, it was the way Alexander would just stand there, nodding along, never defending me. One evening, after another one of Evelyn's impromptu visits, I decided to confront him about it. Alex, we need to talk, I said as we sat down to dinner. I had made lasagna, one of his favorites, hoping a good meal might soften the conversation. Sure, what's up? He didn't even look up from his phone, scrolling through emails as he shoveled food into his mouth. Can you please put that down for a minute? I asked, my patience wearing thin. He sighed but set the phone aside. Okay, I'm listening. It's about your mom, I began, choosing my words carefully. I feel like she's been very involved in our lives lately. And it's starting to feel like she's overstepping. Alexander frowned. What do you mean, overstepping? She's just trying to help. I know she means well, but it's becoming too much. She criticizes everything I do, and it feels like I'm not allowed to make any decisions without her approval. Nora, she's just giving her opinion, he said, shrugging. She has a lot of experience, and she's trying to make sure we have a good start. I set down my fork, frustration bubbling up inside me. But this is our home, Alex. Our life. And it doesn't feel like ours when she's constantly interfering. I need you to back me up on this. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Nora, you're making too much out of this. She's my mother. She just wants what's best for us. But what about what I want? I asked, my voice rising slightly. This is supposed to be our marriage, but it feels like I'm competing with her for your attention. You're not competing with her, he said, his tone dismissive. You're blowing this out of proportion. I stared at him, hurt and anger mixing into a bitter cocktail in my chest. You're not listening to me, Alex. This is important. I need you to be on my side. He sighed again, rubbing his temples. I am on your side, Nora. But you need to understand that she's family. We can't just push her away. I wanted to scream that it wasn't about pushing her away, that it was about setting boundaries. But I could see that this conversation was going nowhere, so I swallowed my frustration and forced a smile. Okay, I said quietly. I hope you'll keep what I said in mind. He nodded, clearly relieved that the conversation was over, and returned to his phone. I stared at my plate, my appetite gone. This wasn't how I had imagined married life. The real breaking point came a few weeks later, on a Saturday morning. I was still in bed, savoring the rare chance to sleep in, when I heard the front door open and close. I assumed it was Alexander, maybe heading out to grab coffee, but when I heard voices, his and Evelyn's, I knew something was up. I threw on a robe and made my way downstairs, where I found Evelyn in the foyer, surrounded by boxes. Alexander stood next to her, looking uncomfortable. What's going on? I asked, glancing between them. Evelyn smiled, that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Good morning, Nora. I hope you don't mind, but I've decided to stay with you two for a little while. My stomach dropped. Stay with us? For how long? Oh, just until I get back on my feet, she said breezily. My condo is undergoing some renovations, and it's just too noisy to stay there. I knew you wouldn't mind having me here. I shot Alexander a look, expecting him to explain that this was a terrible idea, that we needed our space as a newly married couple. But instead, he just avoided my gaze, staring at the floor like a scolded child. Alex? I prompted, trying to keep my voice steady. Is this something we discussed? He cleared his throat, finally meeting my eyes. It's just temporary, Nora. It'll be fine. It's a win-win for everyone, Evelyn added cheerfully. I can help out around the house, take some of the burden off you, Nora. And besides, family should stick together, don't you think? I felt the walls closing in around me. Of course, I said weakly, forcing a smile that felt like it would crack my face in half. Evelyn beamed, clearly pleased with herself. Wonderful. Now, Alexander, could you help me bring in the rest of my things? He nodded and followed her outside, leaving me standing there in a daze. This was no longer just a visit. Evelyn had officially moved in, and I had no say in the matter. The next few days were a nightmare. Evelyn took over the house like it was her own, rearranging the kitchen, redecorating the living room, and even critiquing my wardrobe choices. Every time I tried to assert myself, she would brush me off with a condescending laugh or a pointed comment about how I was still learning. The worst part was Alexander's silence. He never once stood up for me, never once told his mother to back off. It was as if he had chosen her side, and I was left to fend for myself in my own home. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I came home to find Evelyn in the kitchen, cooking dinner. She had taken over my favorite recipe, one that Alexander had always loved when I made it, and was humming to herself like she belonged there. Smells good, I said stiffly, dropping my bag on the counter. Evelyn glanced at me over her shoulder, smiling. "Oh, I thought I'd give you a break tonight, dear. You work so hard, after all." I clenched my jaw. "I appreciate that, but I actually enjoy cooking. It helps me unwind after a long day." "Well, tonight, you can unwind by relaxing," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Dinner will be ready in just a few minutes." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand that she leave my house and give me back my life. But instead, I swallowed the anger and went upstairs to change. When I came back down, Alexander was already at the table, chatting with his mother like nothing was wrong. I sat down in silence, my frustration boiling over but trapped inside me. Halfway through dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. I set down my fork and looked directly at Alexander. "Alex, can we talk after dinner?" I asked, my voice tight. He glanced at me, clearly sensing the tension. "Sure. What's up?" I shook my head. Later. Evelyn, oblivious or deliberately ignoring the tension, kept talking about her day, but I barely heard her. All I could think about was the conversation we needed to have, the one where I would demand that he choose, once and for all, whether he was married to me or to his mother. When dinner was finally over, and Evelyn excused herself to her room, my guest room, now her room, I turned to Alexander. "We need to talk." "Now," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to keep it steady. He sighed, clearly dreading the conversation. "Nora, if this is about my mom." "Of course, it's about your mom," I snapped. "She's taken over our lives, Alex. This is not what I signed up for when we got married." He rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. "I know it's been difficult, but it's only temporary. Can't you just try to get along with her? For my sake? For your sake?" I repeated, incredulous. "What about my sake, Alex? I feel like a guest in my own home. I can't keep living like this." He looked at me, his expression torn. "What do you want me to do, Nora? She's my mother. I can't just throw her out." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. "I'm not asking you to throw her out. But I am asking you to stand up for us, for our marriage. We need boundaries, Alex. If you can't set them with her, then I don't know how we're going to make this work." He stared at me, and for a moment, I thought he was going to argue. But then he just nodded, defeated. "Okay. I'll talk to her." It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was something. I nodded back, feeling a small flicker of hope. "Thank you," I said quietly. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the faint sounds of Evelyn moving around in the next room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much bigger battle, one that I wasn't sure I could win. The weeks dragged on, each one more exhausting than the last. Despite Alexander's promise to talk to Evelyn, nothing changed. If anything, she seemed more entrenched in our lives, as if my request for boundaries had only solidified her position in our home. The tension was unbearable. Every room I walked into felt suffocating, every conversation felt like a landmine waiting to explode. It wasn't just the small things anymore, her comments about my cooking, her unsolicited advice on how to run the household, or her constant rearranging of the furniture. It was her presence, looming over everything like a dark cloud. And Alexander, the man who had vowed to be my partner in life, was nowhere to be found in this struggle. He had become a ghost, slipping into the background whenever the tension rose, leaving me to fend for myself. The breaking point came one Friday evening. I had just found out that I was pregnant. The pregnancy test sat on the bathroom counter, 2 pink lines glaring back at me. I should have been overjoyed. I should have been calling Alexander to share the news, feeling his arms wrap around me as we celebrated the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. But instead, I felt a wave of dread. How could I bring a child into this mess? How could I raise a baby in a home where I felt like a stranger, where my voice didn't matter? I stood in the bathroom for what felt like hours, the weight of the news pressing down on me. When I finally emerged, Alexander was downstairs in the living room, watching TV with his mother. The sight of them sitting together, comfortable and content, only fueled my anger. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the living room. Evelyn glanced up at me with a smile, but it faded as soon as she saw my expression. Alexander noticed too, muting the TV and turning to me with concern. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice cautious. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. But the words came out before I could stop them. "I'm pregnant." The room fell silent. Evelyn's eyes widened in surprise, while Alexander stared at me, his expression unreadable. "That's amazing," he finally said, though there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. He stood up and walked over to me, reaching out to pull me into an embrace. But I stepped back, avoiding his touch. "Is it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because right now, it doesn't feel amazing. It feels terrifying. I'm bringing a child into a home that doesn't feel like mine, into a marriage where I don't even feel like I matter." Alexander's face fell, his confusion turning into hurt. "Nora, don't say that. Of course, you matter." "Do I?" I snapped, my emotions spilling over. "Because ever since your mother moved in, I felt like I'm the outsider here. Like I'm competing for space in my own life. And you've done nothing to change that." Evelyn cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the tension. "Nora, dear, I think you're overreacting. I've only ever tried to help." "Help?" I interrupted, my gaze snapping to her. "You've taken over, Evelyn. This was supposed to be our home, our marriage, but you've made it all about you. And I'm done. I'm done with being pushed aside, done with feeling like I don't belong in my own life." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her calm demeanor slipping. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but I've only ever had the best intentions. Maybe if you were more open to—" "Stop," I shouted, cutting her off. "Just stop. This isn't about your intentions. It's about the fact that I can't live like this anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. I'm pregnant, and the last thing I want is to bring a child into this toxic environment." Alexander stepped forward, desperation in his voice. "Nora, please, let's not do this now. We can talk about this." "No, Alex, we've been talking for months, and nothing has changed," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I can't keep sacrificing my happiness, my sanity, for the sake of keeping the peace. If you can't choose me, if you can't put our marriage first, then I'm leaving." He stared at me, shock and pain etched into his features. "You're leaving? Nora, don't do this. We can fix this. I'll talk to my mom, I promise." "It's too late for that," I said, shaking my head. "I've given you every chance, and you've chosen her every time. I'm done waiting for you to stand up for us. I need to take care of myself now. I need to take care of this baby." Evelyn looked stunned, but she quickly recovered, her voice icy. "If you walk out that door, Nora, don't expect to come back." I turned to her, meeting her gaze with a calmness I hadn't felt in months. "I'm not coming back, Evelyn. You can have this house, this life. But you won't have me. And you won't have my child." With that, I turned and walked upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Alexander calling after me, but I didn't stop. I packed a small bag, taking only what I needed. As I walked back downstairs, I found him standing at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale and stricken. "Nora, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "Don't leave. We can fix this. I love you." I paused, my heart aching at the sight of him. But I knew that staying would only mean more of the same, more heartache, more disappointment. I had to do what was right for me, for my baby. "I love you too, Alex," I said quietly. "But I love myself more. And I love this baby too much to let it grow up in a home like this." Tears welled in his eyes, and for a moment, I almost faltered. But then I thought of all the times I had been ignored, dismissed, overshadowed. I thought of the life I wanted for my child, one filled with love, respect, and peace. And I knew I was making the right choice. Without another word, I walked past him and out the door. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. As I made my way to my parents' house, I felt a mixture of emotions: grief for the marriage that had crumbled, fear for the uncertain future ahead, but also a profound sense of relief. I had finally taken control of my life, and no matter what came next, I knew I would face it on my terms. When I reached my parents' doorstep, my mother opened the door and took one look at my face before pulling me into her arms. "Nora, what happened?" "I'm leaving him, Mom," I whispered, tears finally spilling over. "I'm leaving." She didn't say anything, just held me tight, letting me cry. And in that moment, I knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, I had made the right decision. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.